Joseph, tell us all about Henry James.
Henry James. Well, Henry James. Of course, you know who Henry James was.
We'll take it. We'll assume that our erudite viewers,
a great American novelist who was born in 1843, died in 1916. Actually, it's his anniversary, 100 years ago.
Oh, it is, isn't it?
I don't hear much talk about that. Which is
No. They're all going on about Shakespeare.
Oh, well, who was Shakespeare?
some weird guy with long hair back in the.
Well, Henry James is a very fascinating novelist. He came from a very unique family. They say his country was his family. He had a grandfather from Ireland, a father who was a Swedenborgian philosopher, Henry James Sr., who was actually quite famous in his time. He was a friend of Emerson and all those kind of people. His father lost his leg in a fire when he was young and had gone through great suffering, and also had undergone what's called a spiritual vastation, where he had a kind of a vision of ultimate reality. Now, he produced two great sons, William, who was the great philosopher, and Henry, who was a great novelist.
Okay.
In all his life, Henry was overshadowed by William, because William had a glorious career in Harvard, and Henry went off to live on the continent at first, and then in London, and wrote novels which his brother thought were very frivolous. The theme of his novels was the so-called international theme. A young, innocent American girl comes to Europe, anxious to live to the full, falls prey to sinister people in Europe. Sometimes they're actually Americans who have become Europeanized.
Yeah, but a lot of them are Italian, though.
Well, not really.
No,
I mean,
not like Fosco, in Women in White,
The Woman in
I'm thinking. I'm more into Wilkie Collins. You see,
The Woman in White. Haven't really read that novel. I must read it.
I like Wilkie Collins myself. Yeah.
Anyway, for example, Daisy Miller was his first and almost only commercial success, and it's true that Daisy comes to grief because of her affair with an Italian man. But that's not the real cause of her tragedy. The real cause is the narrator of the story, whose name is Winterbourne, who has got the puritanical mentality and is judging her. He's judging her as a loose, reckless girl.
Right.
And it's because of his judgment on her that she dies. So this is typical of Henry James. He is deeply anti-puritanical. This is one of the keys to understanding what Henry James is up to.
Well, a lot of the novelists of that time weren't they? I mean, Dickens, for example, is very anti-Puritan. You get a lot, and you like Jane Eyre, for example, Charlotte Bronte. She's got, I mean, Puritans are hypocrites, basically.
Yes.
Mostly. I mean, for a lot of these writers, they were on a sort of anti-Puritan crusade, really.
Well, Nathaniel Hawthorne was.
Yeah.
People quote the Scarlet Letter, but that's a very anti-puritanical novel.
Yeah.
And Henry James actually admired Hawthorne a lot, and he wrote a book about Hawthorne, but he thought that Hawthorne, that no literary genius could flourish in America. America was barren soil. So that's why he fled to Europe, to get inspiration and to get stimulation. But at the end of his life, he made a very interesting comment. He said, "My life in Europe has been a catastrophe.
Right.
If I had to begin all over again, I would become truly American. I would love my continent. I would embrace it. I would espouse its rhythms of life." And he might have been a greater novelist if he had done that. Strange to say.
Well, he's a great stylist, though, wasn't he? I mean, he's
a tremendous stylist.
He does write rather beautifully.
Absolutely, and he did that from day one. At the age of 20, he was writing perfectly beautiful English.
Right.
Now,
it's very lucid and it's not full of frills. It says it very
every
nicely.
Word, no word is wasted. Even though the sentences can be extremely long, everything is saying something, right?
Yeah.
Now, the great moment in Henry James's development, according to me anyway, is The Portrait of a Lady, which is perhaps his most famous novel.
Yeah.
He read Middlemarch by George Eliot. Now, he had a little bit of bad feeling towards George Eliot because he had presented her with a copy of his first novel. And when he went back to visit her lover...
the guy she lived with, yes, I can't remember his name.
Came down the path as he was leaving. Said, please take this back. It was the novel he had given her, but she hadn't even opened.
Wow.
And anyway, he read Middlemarch and he wrote a review, which is not very flattering. He says it's a very wonderful novel, but there's no shape, form, or design to it. It's just everything dumped into it. So he decided that his novel, A Portrait of a Lady, would be a perfectly formally beautiful work of art.
Right.
Now it's true that George Eliot's novel, has more living human beings. Dorothea is a more real woman than Isabel, the heroine of James's novel. But in James's novel, there's an amazing moment where Isabel at night looks into the dying embers of a fire and realizes the truth about her whole life, how she has been lured into a loveless marriage by a deceiving husband who is actually a very Italianized American.
Right.
And the whole chapter is a drama in her consciousness. And this is the birth of the later James, the novelist of consciousness and of consciousness only. But James didn't follow that path immediately. He wrote a political novel called The Princess Casamassima. He wrote another long novel called The Tragic Muse, which are heavy, lumpish works. And then he decided, I'm going to become a playwright. I'm going to wow the public with my wonderful dramas. And that was the worst failure of his whole life.
I didn't even know he'd done that. No,
5 years of horrible plays. Nobody reads them even, not much less theatrical success. One of them is called Daisy Miller. He takes up that story of Daisy Miller and gives it a happy ending where Daisy marries, not the Italian, but Winterbourne.
Oh dear.
It's prostitution. And at that stage, in 1995, James was booed off the stage.
Right.
And by a strange coincidence, Colm Tóibín and David Lodge at the same time wrote novels about Henry James, both of them beginning with that incident of James being booed, because it was the most dramatic incident.
Who and David Lodge, did you say?
David Lodge and Colm Tóibín, the Irish
novelist,
who won the Booker Prize. David Lodge was very disappointed because Tóibín stole the show. So then David Lodge wrote a book called The Year of Henry James, recounting his humiliation and his frustration.
It must be I have another person writing a book on the same thing as you're doing.
I would love to read that book by Lodge, The Year of Henry James.
I like David Lodge, actually. I like
he's
David
great.
Lodge.
He's tremendous.
Yeah, he's a good...
Anyway, after that, James returned to the art of the novel and the art of the short story, or
he wrote
novella.
Short stories.
He wrote 120 of them. They're all masterpieces.
Yeah.
His 20 novels are not all masterpieces, but they're all very interesting.
Right. No, my mum was a great reader of Henry James. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, so did you read your Henry James at your
No,
mother's knee?
I don't know that she read it necessarily when I was a kid. I think it's something she came to later on in life. You know, but I mean, she was in her 90s when she died earlier this year, and she read voraciously right up until the end. You know. So
have you any idea what novels?
I think anything and everything. I think if it was by Henry James, she would give it a whirl. Yeah, she'd give it a spin, as it were.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But James then culminated his career with the famous 3 novels called The Ambassadors, The Wings of the Dove, and The Golden Bowl, which are extremely long, extremely elaborate, and extremely great novels.
Right.
The Ambassadors is about a man who comes to Paris from Puritan New England to bring back the erring son of a woman with whom he has an attachment and who is kind of blackmailing him. If he toes the line, she might marry him. This is a man at age 55. He comes to Paris. He realizes to his horror that he has wasted his whole life, that he should have lived in Paris, where he spent a few months as a young man. And then he finds that the woman's son has been miraculously transformed by his stay in Paris, has become an extraordinarily cultivated, elegant young man. So he can't bring himself to tell the young man, come back home to mother. He says instead, that woman who has done such wonders for you, namely a certain Madame de Vionnet, you should reciprocate her love, and so on and so forth. And the young man, to his horror, says, I've had enough of this. I want to go back and be a successful businessman. And the narrator is left alone, and he resolves he will live in Paris for the rest of his life and dump the whole lot of his Puritan American friends. Then the second novel, The Wings of the Dove, a very powerful novel about betrayal and guilt. And it's the typical Jamesian story. A dying American woman, very rich, but aware that she has a fatal disease. She wants to live life to the full before she dies. She wants to experience everything, and of course she wants to experience the sacred passion of love. Well,
I should hope so.
Well, it so happens that there's a scheming couple, and I think they're British. I think they're both British. Yes, Kate Croy. The first lines of the novel are, "She waited, comma, Kate Croy." She's like a bird of prey,
Right.
and she's manipulating the feckless Merton Densher. And she tells Merton, you know, we can make a tidy killing for ourselves if you were to amuse our rich American friend in her final years so that she leaves you her fortune.